want to start with a bit of background to the river and why I'm here and why the Wildlife Trust is concerned about it. Obviously, we've already said it's an SSSI and an SAC. And I first came to Herefordshire in 1994 to head up the team that notified the rivers, so I know all three of our notified rivers very well. But what we did was we notified the river channel. We didn't notify the catchment, we didn't notify the floodplain, we just did the channel, and we also did sort of 10 metres along either side, and we had hoped in our innocence that that would give us a handle on what was happening in the catchment and that farmers would come to us and talk about how they manage the land adjacent to the rivers. But it just didn't work out like that. And of course, since 1996, there's been a massive change in agriculture in the county. We've got intensification of livestock. Nearly all of the floodplain meadows that I used to know have been ploughed up initially for potatoes. That all happened in the sort of 1996 plus. And of course, on top of that, we've got intensive poultry units. So what we've got is basically a manure mountain going on in the river catchment, because we've already got a huge amount of artificial fertiliser being applied to support the crops that we've got. And then on top of that, we've got all the manure rising out of the poultry units. And the catchment is really struggling to cope with that. The refocus study that has been done by the University of Lancashire is showing that artificial fertiliser and farmyard manure and the poultry manure being applied in the catchment is adding 3 million kilograms per annum more phosphate than the crops actually need. And of course, the problem in Herefordshire is that the soils we've got, Herefordshire in general, is very vulnerable to loss of phosphates. So we've got a sort of, I was going to say a triple whammy, but it's a quadruple whammy. We've got very leaky soils. The silty soils we've got in our catchment don't hang on to phosphate, they let it go. We've got the topography. We've got quite high levels of rainfall. And particularly, one of the things that's bothering us now is high levels of rainfall in the summer as climate change starts to create more stormy weather. And we've got the changing agricultural things. So all of those things have really hit the catchment hard. And that's why we're seeing the phosphate levels failing on the River Lug and why they're nearly at failing on the River Wye. So what we have to look at is how to deal with that. And there are lots of pathways that the phosphate, or maybe I should first say why the phosphate is a problem. So it acts as a natural fertiliser. It comes into the water, it causes algal blooms. I think you've all seen the algal blooms and you've seen them referred to. And it also, a lot of it is coming in on soil, and the soil and the silt in the water is causing other problems as well. So we've got a number of reasons for that. One is that we've got a lot of overland flow of soil with phosphate coming off the farms into the drains and the rivers and the ditches. We've got leakage from manure stores. And then we've got some catastrophic events that happen from time to time when you get leakage from intensive poultry units, from manure stores, slurry stores and the like. So there's lots of things going on, and there's also, on top of all of that, which is one of the things that makes it difficult, there's also subsoil flow into the watercourses, and that is also a problem which is slightly more difficult. So what we've got is a highly complex problem which needs a big basket of solutions. I'm just going to turn my notes over, make sure I tell you all the right things. So we've always taken a sort of carrot and stick approach. And one of the problems in Herefordshire is the carrot hasn't really been working. There's not been enough will. The farmers are pretty set in their ways, I have to say. You've heard from Regen Ben, and Regen Ben is brilliant, and what he's doing is brilliant. And if all the farmers did what Regen Ben does, we'd be well on the way to solving the problem. But it's taking a long time for that to get traction. Even though there are lots of organisations trying to work with farmers to get that approach taken up. The Herefordshire Wildlife Trust has got farm advisors. Wye&Usk Foundation, you'll hear from them later, have farm advisors. The statutory agencies have farm advisors. But there's just not enough of us, and there's just not enough money coming into the system. A recent presentation to the Nutrient Management Plan Board was from a project on the Curl Brook, where they've been doing a lot of work trying to address this problem. And they've spent nearly £1 million in the first 5 years of that project. And they've reckoned by scaling up, I need to look at the figures, They reckon to scale up what they've been doing in the Cowell catchment to our catchment would take £26 million for the River Lug and £39 million for the River Wye. And so one of the problems is that we don't have enough money and we don't have the political will. So Herefordshire Council recently wrote to Rebecca Powell, asking her to A, think about a funded package for the Wye, and B, to consider a water protection zone. And we've had both of those turned down very recently. The political will to solve this problem is not yet there. And it's not helped by the fact that some of the agencies, and I'm going to be a bit outspoken here because I only got 3 weeks left as CEO, some of the problems is some of the agencies like the NFU and the CLA don't call out the bad practice as much as they should. And so they make it difficult for people like Ben who are trying to do their best for the river. You know, not all farmers are doing bad things. We need to work with the good farmers and we need to spread that practice and be collaborative and persuade all the other ones to take up those sorts of measures. So what are the measures that we need? So the most important thing, I think, is in the first place is to reduce the amount of phosphate coming into the catchment in the first place. So we've got it coming in artificial fertilisers, poultry manure. It comes into the poultry manure via the feed. We need to reduce that. The farmers are applying far too much, many of the farmers, far too much phosphate in their artificial fertilisers. The Refocus study shows that if they stopped applying phosphate, now there'd probably be 10 years of legacy phosphate in the soils. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we need to change the farming practice, and you heard Regen Ben talk about that very eloquently. We need more Regen Bens right across the catchment. And then the third thing really, which is what I'm here to talk about a bit more, is to block those pathways to pollution. And that's what we've been doing largely with our farm advice. So the obvious, simple and easy thing that often gets done first is fencing along the watercourses. And that will stop cattle trampling in the water, stops erosion of the bank sides, it allows revegetation of the riverside banks. And all of that helps to stop pollution from the immediate banks of the river. Then the other things that people tend to do are buffers, buffer strips, headlands, field corners, taking bits of fields out of production, no spray zones. What we really need is those sort of no spray and no spread zones, 12 to 24 metres from every single watercourse in the catchment, which is a bit of a feat, really. And we also need, I mean, the other thing is it's not just about the watercourses. If I'd had a PowerPoint, and some of you may have seen my PowerPoint on Friday at the Lug event, there are lots of routes for soil runoff from the fields to get into the river. So that it's coming across the fields, it's coming out onto the roads, it's coming, down through the subsoil pipes, all the rest of it. So we need to use all the tools and techniques that we've got, like SciMap, to work out what those pathways are. Because it isn't, the obvious thing of putting a buffer by the watercourse isn't always the only thing. You have to look at what are the pathways, how can we intercept those pathways, can we change the direction in which we plough our soil when we're planting our potatoes, all those sorts of things. The sorts of things Ben was talking about of undersowing cover crops with things like maize, which is a particularly difficult crop in terms of soil loss. We've also been looking at things like interception ponds, especially where you've got under drainage in fields, and things like leaky dams. And what we're trying to do is focus in, not on the main river, but in the tributaries, because as I said before, the river it should be a living system. It should be the channel and the floodplain and the catchment, and we need to take these measures right across the catchment. The higher up the better, because you're intercepting the problem nearer to the source and getting benefit for further of the river. And the best thing of all, really, I think, is riparian woodland. And the things, if we could establish more riparian woodland and more trees in the landscape, that would make a really big difference to the river. It could shade the water, which is good for the fish. It cools the water temperature. That will help resolve some of the problems with the algal blooms. It's really good for trapping silt. It's good for floodwater attenuation. It also has lots of biodiversity benefits, of course, and carbon sequestration if we want to stray into sort of the carbon agenda as well. So, as I said before, the Herefordshire Wildlife Trust has a couple of farm advisors at the moment working in the catchment, working with all the farmers that we can to try and do that. What we need really to achieve that is more money, of course. If any of you would like to join the Wildlife Trust, we'd really appreciate that. Our recruiter is at a stand over there. We've also got our wild play team who are offering some wildlife activities for the children amongst you, young and old. So continue to, I think this is great that so many people are coming here to lend their voice to support for the river. We all need to act. We need to work with the farmers. We need to work with everybody we can who will collaborate to help solve this problem, because I said before, it's multifaceted. And I think you're going to hear later from the Wine Usk Foundation, who've been doing a lot of brilliant things also in the catchment. Okay, thank you.